The stranger's boots hit the dusty street of Wallace, Idaho, just as Nora Mitchell was reading the letter that would destroy everything she had left. And though she did not know it yet, those same boots would carry the man who would save her life without asking for a single thing in return. The year was 1884, and Nora had arrived in Wallace only 3 months earlier, fleeing the memories of St. Louis and the grave that held her husband Thomas. She had thought distance would provide safety, that the Western Territories would offer her a fresh beginning where she could raise her 7-year-old daughter Emma in peace. The little dress shop she had opened on Bank Street was modest but promising, and for the first time since Thomas died, she had felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Then the letter came. She stood behind the counter of her shop, Emma playing with fabric scraps in the corner, and read the words again as if repetition might change their meaning. Her hands trembled so badly the paper rustled like autumn leaves. The debt collector's message was clear and brutal. Thomas had borrowed heavily before his death, far more than Nora had ever known, and the men who held those debts had tracked her west. They wanted $3,000, a sum so astronomical it might as well have been $1 million. She had 2 weeks to pay, or they would take everything, the shop, her savings, possibly even Emma. "Mama, why are you crying?" Emma's small voice cut through the roaring in Nora's ears. She had not realized tears were sliding down her cheeks. Quickly she wiped them away and forced a smile that felt like broken glass on her face. "I am fine, sweetheart. Just some dust in my eyes." Emma did not look convinced, but she was a perceptive child who had learned not to push when her mother's voice took on that brittle quality. She returned to her play, and Nora folded the letter with shaking fingers, tucking it into her apron pocket where it seemed to burn against her hip. She spent the rest of that day in a fog, mechanically helping the few customers who wandered in, her mind frantically calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to salvation. By the time she locked the shop door at dusk, she had a headache pounding behind her eyes and no more answers than when she started. The boarding house where she and Emma rented 2 small rooms was a 10-minute walk through streets that were transforming, as Wallace grew from mining camp to proper town. She barely noticed the new buildings going up or the men calling out evening greetings. Emma chattered beside her about a butterfly she had seen, and Nora made appropriate sounds while her thoughts spun in desperate circles. That night, after Emma fell asleep in the narrow bed they shared, Nora sat by the window and watched the stars emerge over the mountains. She had $67 in savings. Her shop made perhaps $20 a week in profit when business was good. There was no possible way to raise $3,000 in 14 days. She would lose everything. The thought of returning east was unbearable. She had no family left, and St. Louis held nothing but painful memories. But staying seemed equally impossible. The debt collectors would not show mercy, and she had heard stories of what happened to people who could not pay their debts. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and allowed herself a few minutes of despair before straightening her spine. She would find a way. She had to. The next morning, she woke determined to seek advice. After dropping Emma at the small schoolhouse that had just opened, Nora walked to the bank, though the thought of discussing her situation with strangers made her stomach churn. The banker, a portly man named Mr. Simmons, listened to her halting explanation with an expression of increasing skepticism. $3,000 is a considerable sum, Mrs. Mitchell, he said, folding his hands over his substantial belly. I'm afraid the bank cannot extend that kind of credit to a woman with no collateral beyond a small dress shop. If you had property, or perhaps a male relative to co-sign— I have neither, Nora interrupted, pride warring with desperation. But I have a good business, my customers are satisfied, and the shop is beginning to turn a real profit. Mr. Simmons shook his head slowly, his jowls quivering with emotion. I am sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. The bank's policy is quite clear on this matter. She left the bank with her cheeks burning and her hopes crumbling. Over the next 3 days, she tried every option she could imagine. She spoke to shopkeepers about buying her inventory at a discount. She inquired about loans from private individuals. She even, in a moment of profound humiliation, asked the church if they had any charitable funds available. Every door closed in her face. By the 5th day, she was beginning to accept the inevitable. That afternoon, a man walked into her shop just as she was measuring ribbon for Mrs. Henderson, one of her regular customers. Nora glanced up at the jingle of the door chime and felt her breath catch slightly. He was tall, which was not unusual in the West, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded attention. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that shadowed a face tanned by years of sun and wind. His eyes, when they met hers, were an unexpected clear gray, like creek water over stone. "I will be with you in just a moment, sir," she said, turning her attention back to the ribbon while her heart beat a little faster, for reasons she could not name. "No hurry, madam," he replied, his voice low and rough-edged, in a way that suggested he spent more time talking to horses than people. She finished with Mrs. Henderson, accepted payment, and watched the older woman leave before turning to the stranger. Up close, she could see he was perhaps in his early 30s, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often. There was a scar along his left temple, faded white against his tanned skin. "How may I help you?" she asked, professional despite her curiosity. It was unusual for a man, especially one who looked like a working cowboy, to enter a dress shop. He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that needed cutting. "Are you Mrs. Mitchell?" Ice flooded her veins. "I am. And you are?" "Name is Lucas Jennings, madam. I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles east of here. I'm not here to buy anything." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I heard in town that you might be facing some difficulties. Financial difficulties." Nora's face flamed. "I do not know who told you that, Mr. Jennings, but my personal affairs are not a topic for town gossip." "No, madam, they should not be," he agreed mildly, "and I apologize for the intrusion. But if what I heard is true, and there are men coming to collect on debts your late husband left behind, I might be able to help." She stared at him, torn between outrage at the invasion of her privacy and desperate hope. "Why would you want to help me? I do not even know you." "That is a fair question." He turned his hat in his hands, and she noticed his fingers were long and work-roughened, the hands of a man who did not shy from hard labor. "The truth is, I knew your husband, years ago before you married him." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "You knew Thomas?" "I did. We rode together for a time, back when we were both young and stupid. Lost touch after he went east." Lucas met her eyes steadily. "I only learned he had passed when I heard your name mentioned in connection with debts. I'm sorry for your loss." Nora sank into the chair behind her counter, her legs suddenly unreliable. "Thomas never mentioned anyone named Lucas Jennings." "I would not expect him to. Like I said, it was a long time ago, and we did not part on the best of terms. But we were friends once, and I figure I owe his memory something." He paused. "How much do you need?" $3,000, she whispered, and the sum sounded even more impossible spoken aloud in her small shop. "But I cannot accept such a sum from a stranger, even if you have it to give, which I find difficult to believe, if you will pardon my bluntness." "I have it," he said simply. "Had a good few years with the cattle, and I do not spend much. The money is sitting in the bank doing nothing. Seems to me it could do some good here." "And what would you want in return?" Nora asked, her voice sharp with suspicion, born of too many hard lessons. "Men do not give away fortunes without expecting something back." Lucas looked almost offended. "I do not want anything, Mrs. Mitchell. I told you, I owe Thomas's memory. Consider it paying off an old debt of my own." "That makes no sense," she said flatly. "No one does this. There must be something you expect. Marriage? Services of some kind?" Her cheeks burned as she said the last part, but she needed to know exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. "No, madam," he said firmly, his gray eyes steady on hers. "I expect nothing. You would not owe me a single thing. I will pay off the debts, and that will be the end of it. You can go on with your life and forget I ever walked through that door." Nora wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him, but she had learned that nothing in life came free, that every gift had strings attached, and the bigger the gift, the heavier the chains. "I need time to think about this." "You do not have much time," Lucas pointed out, not unkindly. "Those debt collectors will be here in 9 days, according to what I heard, but I understand your hesitation. Think on it tonight. I'm staying at the hotel on Silver Street. If you decide to accept my help, come find me tomorrow. If not, I will ride out and you will never see me again." He settled his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. Nora found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Mr. Jennings, Why did you and Thomas part on bad terms?" He paused with his hand on the door handle, his broad shoulders tensing slightly. "That is between him and me, madam. It has nothing to do with you or this offer. I give you my word on that." Then he was gone, the door chime marking his exit, and Nora was left alone with her thoughts and a decision that felt impossibly heavy. That evening, she could barely eat the simple stew she prepared. Emma noticed her distraction and went to bed without her usual protests, her brown eyes worried in a way that made Nora's heart ache. When her daughter was asleep, Nora paced the small confines of their rooms and tried to think clearly. Everything in her experience told her Lucas Jennings's offer was too good to be true. Men did not simply hand over $3,000 and walk away. There had to be a catch, something he was not telling her. And yet, he had seemed sincere. Those gray eyes had held hers without flinching, and there had been nothing predatory in his manner. If anything, he had seemed almost uncomfortable, like a man performing an unpleasant duty rather than setting a trap. And what choice did she really have? Without his help, she would lose everything in 9 days. With his help, she at least had a chance to build the life she wanted for Emma. Even if there were strings attached, even if he later demanded something in return, at least she would have bought herself time to figure out another solution. By midnight, she had made her decision. The next morning, after ensuring Emma was safely at school, Nora walked to the hotel with her heart hammering against her ribs. The clerk directed her to room 7, and she stood outside the door for a full minute before gathering the courage to knock. Lucas opened it almost immediately, and she wondered if he'd been waiting. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, though he had clearly bathed and shaved. The sharp planes of his face were even more striking clean-shaven, and Nora found herself noticing details she had missed in her agitation yesterday. The way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the thin white scar that ran along his knuckles, the quiet intensity in the way he looked at her, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, stepping back to let her enter. "I hoped you would come." "I accept your offer," she said without preamble, staying near the door because being alone with a man in a hotel room felt dangerously improper, even under these circumstances. "But I need you to understand something. I will pay you back, every dollar. It may take me years, but I will not be in your debt forever." Something flashed across his face, too quick to identify. "That is not necessary." "It is necessary to me," she insisted. "I need to know that this is a loan, not charity, and certainly not payment for anything else. A loan that I will repay. If you cannot agree to those terms, then I cannot accept your help." Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. If that is what you need, then we will call it a loan. No interest, and you can pay it back whenever you are able." "I want to sign papers," Nora continued, her voice steadier now that they were negotiating terms she could understand. "A proper loan agreement. It needs to be official." "We can do that," he agreed. "I will have Mr. Simmons at the bank draw up the papers this morning. When are the debt collectors supposed to arrive?" "In 8 days. They sent word to deliver the payment to the hotel. Then we will get ahead of them. I will go to the bank now and arrange the transfer. Where did your husband borrow the money?" Nora pulled the crumpled letter from her reticule and handed it to him. Lucas read it carefully, his expression darkening slightly. "These are not reputable lenders. They are charging interest rates that ought to be illegal." "Thomas was desperate," Nora said quietly, surprised to find herself defending the man whose hidden debts had brought her to this crisis. His business was failing, and he thought he could turn things around if he just had more capital. "Did you know he was borrowing money?" "Not like this. I knew things were tight, but he always told me not to worry, that he would handle it." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose he did handle it in his own way. He died and left me to deal with the consequences." Lucas looked at her, and there was understanding in his eyes that made her throat tighten. "He should have told you. You deserved to know what you were facing." "Yes," she agreed. "I did. But Thomas always thought he knew best. He wanted to protect me, I suppose, even if his method of protection was to keep me ignorant." She straightened her shoulders. "But that is in the past. I'm dealing with it now." "You are dealing with it," Lucas agreed, and there was a note of respect in his voice that warmed her despite everything. "Wait here a moment." He moved to the small desk in the corner and pulled out a leather satchel. From it, he extracted a thick envelope. I withdrew this yesterday, just in case. It is $3,500, $3,000 for the debt, and the rest for any additional fees or complications that might arise. Nora stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. You were that certain I would accept? I was hoping, but if you had not come, I would have returned it to the bank. He held out the envelope. This is yours now. Go to the bank, have Mr. Simmons draw up both the payment to the debt collectors and the loan agreement between us. Make sure everything is legal and documented. I do not want there to be any confusion later. She took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavier than she expected, the weight of salvation and obligation combined. Mr. Jennings, I do not know how to thank you. You just did, he said simply, and there's no need for more. Go on now, get this settled before anything else goes wrong. Nora left the hotel in a daze and walked directly to the bank. Mr. Simmons was surprised to see her again so soon, and even more surprised when she presented him with the envelope of cash and explained what she needed. To his credit, he asked no questions beyond what was necessary for the paperwork. By noon, she had a bank draft made out to the debt collection agency and a loan agreement bearing both her signature and Lucas Jennings's bold, slightly uneven handwriting. She sent the payment by express courier that very afternoon, along with a coldly worded letter explaining that the debt was paid in full and any future correspondence should cease immediately. Then she returned to her shop and tried to focus on work, though her hands shook every time she thought about what had just transpired. Emma noticed her distraction that evening. Mama, you seem different, happier. Nora hugged her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Things are going to be all right, sweetheart, better than all right. We are going to be just fine. Over the next few days, Nora kept expecting Lucas to appear at her shop with some demand or expectation. Instead, she heard nothing. She learned from casual conversation that he had left town, returning to his ranch. Apparently, he came into Wallace only once every few weeks for supplies and rarely stayed more than a night. The news should have relieved her, but instead, she felt strangely disappointed. 8 days after their agreement, 2 rough-looking men arrived at the hotel, asking for Nora Mitchell. The clerk directed them to her shop, and she met them with her spine straight and the bank's receipt of payment in her hand. They looked over the paperwork with obvious displeasure, but could find no fault with it. The debt was paid. They left Wallace on the afternoon stage, and Nora watched them go with a relief so intense it made her dizzy. She was free. The weight that had pressed on her chest for weeks was finally gone. That evening, she drafted a letter to Lucas Jennings. It took her several attempts to find the right words, to express her gratitude without gushing, to maintain appropriate distance while acknowledging the magnitude of what he had done. In the end, she kept it brief, thanking him for his generosity and assuring him that she would begin repayments as soon as her business allowed. She posted it the next morning and tried not to think about whether he would respond. He did not. The weeks passed, spring sliding into summer, and Nora heard nothing from Lucas Jennings. She told herself she was glad. Their business was concluded, and she could focus on building her life without complications. But she found her thoughts drifting to him at odd moments. The way his gray eyes had looked at her with such steady certainty, the rough gentleness in his voice, the fact that he had helped her, and then simply walked away, asking nothing, expecting nothing, as if $3,000 were no more significant than lending a neighbor a cup of sugar. It made no sense, and Nora did not trust things that made no sense. In early July, she screwed up her courage and rode out to his ranch. She told herself it was simple courtesy, that she needed to establish a payment schedule, and could not do that without speaking to him directly. She did not examine too closely the way her heart beat faster as she followed the directions the livery stable owner had provided. The Jennings ranch was larger than she had expected, with a well-built house and several sturdy outbuildings. Cattle grazed on the hillsides, and she could see men working in the distance. She tied her rented horse to the rail outside the main house and knocked on the door, suddenly uncertain. Lucas answered, and his expression of surprise was almost comical. "Mrs. Mitchell, I was not expecting you." "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced," she said, suddenly feeling foolish. "But I needed to speak with you about the loan repayment schedule. You never answered my letter." "I got your letter," he said, opening the door wider. "I figured you did not need an answer. You thanked me. That was enough. It is not enough, Nora said firmly. We need to discuss terms, payment amounts, schedule, all of it. This is a business arrangement, and it should be treated as such. He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he gestured her inside. Come in then, though I warn you the place is not fancy. The interior of the house was indeed plain but scrupulously clean. Simple furniture, bare walls, nothing decorative or personal except for a framed photograph on the mantel. Nora found herself curious about it but did not presume to ask. They sat at his kitchen table, and she pulled out the ledger she had brought, in which she had carefully calculated her shop's profits and expenses. I believe I can pay you $20 a month to start. As the business grows, I can increase that amount. Lucas shook his head. That's not necessary. Mr. Jennings, we have been over this. I need to repay you. And you will, in time. But there is no rush. Pay me when you can, what you can. I do not need a schedule or fixed amounts. I trust you. He said it so simply, as if trust were not a precious commodity, as if she had not spent the last year learning exactly how rare it was for anyone to trust a widow with nothing but her wits and work ethic. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why do you trust me? Why did you help me? Please, I need to understand. No one is this kind without reason. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. I told you, I knew Thomas. We were friends once. And you parted on bad terms, Nora reminded him, which does not explain this at all. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You want the truth? Thomas saved my life once. We were young, working on a cattle drive together, and I got stupid and careless. Ended up hanging off a cliff edge with a 200-foot drop beneath me. Thomas pulled me up. If not for him, I would be dead. He met her eyes. So when I heard his widow was in trouble, I figured it was time to pay that debt. That is all. Nothing mysterious, nothing complicated. $3,000 is a hefty payment for a life saved years ago, Nora observed. Maybe. But my life has been worth living these past 10 years, and I have Thomas to thank for that. So no, I do not think it is too hefty a price. His voice was firm, final, and she realized she would get no other explanation from him. All right, she said finally. I accept that, but I'm still paying you back, on whatever schedule you prefer or no schedule at all. This is not over just because you are uncomfortable with the idea. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. You are a stubborn woman, Mrs. Mitchell. I have had to be, Mr. Jennings. She stayed for another hour, and they spoke of other things. She told him about her shop, about Emma, about her hopes for the future. He told her about the ranch, about the challenges of the cattle business, about the land he loved with a quiet passion that resonated in every word. By the time she rode back to Wallace, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and Nora felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not just hope, but possibility. After that, she found reasons to visit the ranch every few weeks. She told herself it was about the loan, about maintaining a proper business relationship. But as summer deepened into fall, she had to admit the truth, at least to herself. She enjoyed Lucas's company. He was unlike any man she had known, quiet and steady where Thomas had been voluble and unpredictable. Lucas listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were careful and genuine. There was no artifice in him, no pretense. What you saw was what you got, and what Nora saw, she liked very much. She thought he might like her too, though he never said anything or did anything inappropriate. But there were small signs. The way his face brightened when she arrived. The care he took in making coffee just the way she preferred. The gentle way he spoke to Emma on the few occasions Nora brought her daughter along. He was kind to the child, without being patronizing, treating her like a small person worthy of respect, and Emma blossomed under his attention. By October, Nora had admitted to herself that she was developing feelings for Lucas Jennings that went well beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization terrified her. Thomas had been dead less than 2 years. It felt wrong to be thinking of another man, to be noticing the way Lucas's hands moved when he talked, the rare warmth in his eyes when he smiled, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a stove. She tried to distance herself, cutting back her visits to once a month. Lucas noticed but said nothing, though she thought she saw disappointment in his eyes when she left. She threw herself into her work, expanding her offerings to include men's shirts and children's clothing. Business was good, better than she had hoped, and by late autumn she had saved enough to make her first official loan payment. She rode out to the ranch on a cold November morning, the mountains already dusted with snow, and found Lucas repairing a fence line. He straightened when he saw her approaching, and even from a distance she could see his pleasure at her arrival. "Mrs. Mitchell," he called as she dismounted, "this is a surprise. I have not seen you in over a month." "I have been busy," she said, which was true but not the whole truth. "I came to give you this." She held out an envelope containing $50, more than twice what she had originally proposed as a monthly payment. Lucas took it slowly, frowning slightly as he felt the thickness. "This is too much. It is what I can afford, and it is what I want to pay. Business has been very good, Mr. Jennings. I am ahead of my projections." "That is wonderful," he said, and he sounded genuinely pleased for her. "But you should be saving that money, building up reserves. You do not need to pay me back so aggressively." "I need to do this," Nora said quietly. "Please understand. I need to feel like I am taking care of my own obligations." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I will not argue if this is what you need, but promise me you are not depriving yourself or Emma to do this." "We are fine," she assured him. "Better than fine. We are thriving, actually." "Good." He tucked the envelope into his coat pocket. "Will you come inside? It is cold and I just made coffee." She knew she should refuse, should maintain the distance she had been carefully constructing. Instead, she heard herself say, "Yes, thank you, that would be nice." They sat at his kitchen table as they had so many times before, and the conversation flowed easily despite the month-long gap. Lucas told her about a new bull he had purchased, and she described the order she had received for 6 bridesmaids' dresses for a wedding in Spokane. It was comfortable and warm, and Nora felt the careful walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. "I have missed these visits," Lucas said abruptly, setting down his coffee cup. "I hope your being busy does not mean you will not come back." "I have missed them too," Nora admitted before she could think better of it. His gray eyes held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, something that made her breath catch. "Nora," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I did not just help you because of Thomas." The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them in for too long. "I mean, that was part of it, sure. But the bigger part was you. I saw you in town before I ever came to your shop, saw the way you held your head high even though I could tell you were scared, saw the way you protected your daughter. You were fierce and brave and beautiful, and I could not stop thinking about you. So when I heard about the debts, yes, I saw a chance to pay back Thomas, but I also saw a chance to help you specifically. And I am sorry if that makes you uncomfortable, but I cannot keep pretending that is not the truth." Nora stared at him, her mind reeling. "You should have told me this before." "I know, but I did not want you to feel obligated. I did not want you to think you owed me anything beyond the money, which I honestly do not care about." He looked down at his hands. "I am making a mess of this. I'm not good with words. What I'm trying to say is that I care about you, Nora, a great deal. And I understand if you cannot feel the same way, if it is too soon, or if you just do not see me like that. But I needed you to know." Her first instinct was to flee, to retreat behind the safety of propriety and grief. But she had been running for so long, first from the pain of Thomas's death, then from the terror of the debts, and finally from her own growing feelings. She was tired of running. It is too soon," she said slowly, watching his face fall. "Or at least, it should be. I should still be in mourning. I should not be thinking about another man. But the truth is, Lucas, I have been thinking about you for months, and not just with gratitude, though I am grateful. I think about your smile, your voice, the way you listen like everything I say matters, the way you are kind to Emma. I think about you far more than is proper, and it frightens me." Hope kindled in his eyes. "Why does it frighten you?" "Because the last time I trusted a man, he left me with debts I did not know existed and a future I could not plan for. Because love made me blind before, and I cannot afford to be blind again. Because Emma has already lost one father, and if this goes wrong, She will lose another person she cares about. The words tumbled out, all the fears she had been harboring laid bare between them. Lucas reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I cannot promise I will never make mistakes, but I can promise I will never lie to you or hide things from you. You will always know where you stand with me, Nora, always. And as for Emma, I would never hurt that little girl. I care about her because she is yours and because she is herself. She deserves someone who will be steady and true. And you think you can be that person? Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I can, he said with quiet conviction. I am not Thomas. I will not make his promises or his mistakes, but I will love you both if you will let me, not because you owe me anything, but because I want to, because I choose to. Tears were sliding down Nora's cheeks, and she could not stop them. I want to believe you. Then believe me, Lucas said simply. Give me a chance to prove it. We can go as slow as you need. I will court you properly, the way you deserve. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance. She should say no. She should protect herself and Emma from the risk of more heartbreak. But looking into Lucas's steady gray eyes, she found she could not refuse. All right, she whispered. A chance. His smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of promise. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, and Nora felt something shift inside her. The fear did not disappear, but it was joined by something stronger. Hope. Trust. The beginning of love. Over the next months, Lucas courted her with a patience and propriety that would have satisfied the strictest social guardian. He came to Wallace every Sunday after church and took her and Emma for walks or picnics when weather permitted. He brought small gifts, never extravagant, but always thoughtful. A book of poetry for Nora, a wooden doll he had carved himself for Emma, wildflowers from his ranch, fresh and bright in an old jam jar. He was always respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their first kiss did not happen until Christmas, standing in the snow outside her shop while Emma was at a holiday party. It was gentle and sweet, and Nora felt like she was waking up from a long sleep. I love you, Lucas said against her lips, the words like a gift. I have loved you for a long time. I love you too, she replied, and realized it was true. The fear was still there, but love was bigger, brighter, strong enough to build a future on. They married the following spring in a simple ceremony at the Wallace church. Emma stood beside Nora as her tiny attendant, beaming with joy. The whole town came to celebrate, and if anyone thought it was too soon after Thomas's death, they kept their opinions to themselves. Nora wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Lucas wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with such tenderness that Nora felt her last doubts dissolve. This was right. This was real. This was the future she had not dared to imagine on that terrible day when the debt collector's letter arrived. They moved to the ranch, and Nora kept her shop, hiring a young woman named Sarah to manage it during the days when she could not be in town. Emma thrived in the open spaces, helping Lucas with the animals and running wild in a way that would have been impossible in a city. She called Lucas Papa within 6 months, and Nora watched their relationship deepen with a full heart. Life was not perfect. There were hard days, arguments, challenges that tested them. The ranch work was grueling, and Nora's shop demanded constant attention. Money was sometimes tight, though never as desperately as it had been in those dark days before Lucas's intervention. But they faced everything together, Lucas and Nora, partners in the truest sense. In the spring of 1886, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She had not thought she wanted more children, had not imagined replacing what she had lost with Thomas. But holding Lucas's hand and seeing the wonder in his eyes, she realized this was not replacement. This was addition. New life built on a foundation of honest love. Their son was born in December during the first big snowfall of the season. They named him James Thomas Jennings, honoring both the past and the future. Lucas held his son with shaking hands and tears on his cheeks, and Nora fell in love with him all over again, watching him become a father. Emma adored her baby brother, hovering over him with protective devotion that made Lucas laugh. They were a family, complete and real, built from the ashes of tragedy into something strong and beautiful. The loan was fully repaid by 1888, though it took Nora nearly 4 years of steady payments. The day she made the final payment, Lucas tried to refuse it. "Keep it," he said. "Invest it in the shop or save it for the children." "No," Nora said firmly. "This matters. When we met, I was drowning in debt I did not understand, helping from a stranger who asked for nothing. I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own feet, that I could take care of my own obligations. This last payment is not about you, Lucas. It is about me." He understood then and accepted the money with grace. That night, they burned the loan agreement in the fireplace and watched the papers curl and blacken, the past quite literally going up in smoke. "Do you have any regrets?" Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the flames. Nora thought about the woman she had been, desperate and terrified in a dress shop in Wallace, reading a letter that seemed to spell the end of everything. She thought about the man who had walked in asking for nothing, offering everything. She thought about the journey from fear to trust, from gratitude to love. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Life continued to unfold in the way of lives fully lived. The ranch prospered as Lucas's reputation for quality cattle spread. Nora's shop became one of the most successful in the territory, her designs sought after by women from Spokane to Missoula. Emma grew into a bright, confident young woman who could rope a steer as easily as she could stitch a dress. James was a sturdy, cheerful boy who adored his father and followed him everywhere. In 1889, Nora found herself pregnant again, a surprise that delighted and terrified her in equal measure. She was 34 years old, not ancient but not young either, and the pregnancy was difficult. There were days when she could barely get out of bed, when the nausea and exhaustion overwhelmed her. Lucas was endlessly patient, taking over the household duties without complaint, making sure she rested and ate and did not push herself too hard. Their daughter was born in late summer, a tiny, red-faced creature with a surprisingly loud voice. They named her Margaret Rose, and she had Lucas's gray eyes and Nora's determination. Emma, now 14, was captivated by her baby sister and spent hours rocking her and singing to her. James, 3 years old, was less impressed but tolerated the new addition with reasonable grace. As the 1890s began, Wallace continued to grow and change around them. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more opportunities. Nora opened a second shop in Spokane, making the journey once a month to oversee operations. Lucas diversified the ranch, adding horses to their cattle operation. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with real glass windows and wooden floors and a parlor for entertaining. But success did not change the core of who they were. Lucas was still the quiet, steady man who had walked into her shop and changed her life. Nora was still the fierce, determined woman who had faced her fears and built something beautiful from the ruins. They still sat together in the evenings, talking over the day's events, planning for the future, simply being together in the comfortable silence of long companionship. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Lucas gave her a locket containing a tiny photograph of their family. On the back, he had engraved words that made her cry. "You never owed me anything. You gave me everything." "That works both ways," Nora said, fastening the locket around her neck. "I came west running from debts and ended up with riches I never imagined. Not money, though we have done well enough, but this. You. Our children. This life. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Lucas corrected gently. "I was just a lonely cowboy with too much money and not enough purpose until you came along. You made me want to be better, do more. You gave me a reason to build something that would last." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity mixed with the passion that had never quite faded. Afterwards, lying in Lucas's arms, Nora thought about the twisting path that had brought her here, Thomas's death, the debts that had seemed insurmountable, the stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. She thought about fear and trust, about learning to love again after loss. She thought about the difference between obligation and choice, between owing someone and choosing them freely every single day. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas murmured into her hair. "How lucky I am," Nora said simply. "How lucky we are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," he replied. "This was choice, over and over, choosing each other, choosing this life. That is not luck, that is love." He was right, Nora realized. It was love, the kind built on honesty and respect and daily dedication to each other's happiness. It was not the wild, heedless passion she had known with Thomas, but something deeper and more enduring. It was the kind of love that lasted, that weathered storms, that grew stronger with time instead of fading. The years rolled on, marked by the usual joys and sorrows of any life fully lived. Emma married a young lawyer from Spokane in 1897, a good man who loved her fierce spirit and pioneer heart. James showed an early aptitude for business and took over the management of Nora's shops when he was barely 20, modernizing operations and expanding into mail-order catalogs. Margaret, their youngest, was wild and bright and determined to see the world beyond Idaho, though she promised to always come home. Lucas and Nora aged together, their hair graying, their bodies softening, but their love remaining constant. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, the family they had built branching out across the territory and beyond. The ranch passed to James when Lucas decided he was too old to manage it, though he still rode out every morning to check on the cattle and horses he loved. Nora finally sold her shops in 1910 at the age of 55. She had built something lasting, something that would continue even without her direct involvement. The money from the sale was more than she had ever imagined possible back in those desperate days in 1884. She and Lucas donated a significant portion to establish a fund for widows in financial distress, offering loans at fair terms to women who needed a second chance. "This is because of you," Nora told Lucas when they signed the papers establishing the fund. "You gave me a second chance when I had nowhere else to turn. Now we can give that gift to others." "It is because of us," Lucas corrected, as he always did. "Everything we have built, we built together." They were sitting on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains, when Lucas brought up a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Do you ever think about Thomas, about what your life would have been like if he had lived?" It was 1912, nearly 30 years since Thomas's death, and Nora had to think carefully about her answer. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "Mostly I think about the fact that I loved him, and he loved me. But we were not truly partners. He made decisions without me, kept secrets from me, tried to protect me by keeping me ignorant. I was his wife, but I was not his equal." "And with us?" Lucas asked. "With us, I have always been your equal, your partner. You have never made a major decision without asking my opinion, and I have never felt like you were hiding things from me. That is the difference. That is why this worked when that did not." She took his hand, the skin now thin and spotted with age, but still strong. "I loved Thomas and I grieved him, but I do not wish him back. This life, with you, is exactly what I needed, what I chose, what I would choose again and again, given the chance." Lucas raised her hand to his lips in the gesture that had become their private signal over the decades. "I would choose you too, every time." They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed the entire town. Emma traveled from Spokane with her family. James and his wife brought their 4 children. Margaret came all the way from San Francisco, where she had built a career as a journalist. Looking around at the crowd of people, all connected to her and Lucas by bonds of blood and love, Nora felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This family, this life, this love. It had all started with a debt she could not pay and a stranger who had asked for nothing. "Thank you," she whispered to Lucas as they cut the anniversary cake. "For what?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "For walking into my shop that day, for paying off those debts, for asking for nothing but giving me everything." His eyes, still that clear gray despite his 74 years, shone with love. "You are the one who gave me everything, Nora. I was just a lonely cowboy until you came into my life. You made me into the man I am. You gave me purpose and family and love. I should be thanking you." "Then we will thank each other," Nora said, kissing him while their grandchildren cheered and whistled. Lucas died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1929, just shy of his 78th birthday. Nora woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was profound, a tearing sensation in her chest that made it hard to breathe. But even in her sorrow, she was grateful. Grateful for the 45 years they had shared, grateful that he had gone without pain, grateful that she had known what real love felt like. She lived another 7 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, writing down the stories of her life so that future generations would know where they came from. She wrote about Thomas and the debts that had driven her west. She wrote about the terror of those early days in Wallace and the stranger who had changed everything. She wrote about learning to trust again, to love again, to build a life that honored both the past and the future. When she wrote about Lucas, the words flowed like water. She wrote about his steady strength, his quiet kindness, his ability to make her feel valued and heard. She wrote about the way he had loved Emma as his own and the way he had been with their children, patient and present and proud. She wrote about 45 years of partnership, of facing challenges together, of building something that would outlast them both. "He paid off my late husband's debts and asked for nothing," she wrote in her final pages. "But he gave me everything that mattered, not just security or comfort, though we had those in abundance. He gave me respect, partnership, a love built on honesty and trust. He saw me when I was at my lowest and chose to help without demanding anything in return." That single act of generosity changed the course of my life and the lives of everyone who came after me. I can only hope that our descendants will remember this lesson, that the truest love asks for nothing and gives everything freely, that the greatest gift is to help someone stand on their own feet, not to make them dependent, that real love is a choice made every day, not a debt to be repaid or an obligation to be fulfilled. Nora died in the spring of 1936, surrounded by her family, with Lucas's name on her lips. She was buried beside him on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as wide and blue as possibility itself. The fund they had established continued for decades, helping countless widows rebuild their lives after loss. The shops Nora had founded lasted well into the mid-20th century, providing employment and opportunity for generations of women. The ranch passed through the family, growing and changing, but always remembering its roots. And in the locket buried with Nora, beneath the photograph of her family, were Lucas's engraved words, "You never owed me anything. You gave me everything." It was, in the end, the perfect summary of their love story. A debt that was never really a debt. A gift freely given and returned 1,000-fold. A love that asked for nothing and received everything that mattered. Their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The desperate widow and the cowboy who paid off her late husband's debts without asking for anything in return. The love that grew from that single act of generosity, rooted in respect and trust, blossoming into something that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of drama and challenge and triumph. But more than that, it was a story about the power of choice, about the difference between obligation and love, about the way one act of kindness can ripple forward through time, changing lives in ways the original actors could never imagine. Lucas and Nora had built their life on a foundation of honesty, respect, and freely given love. They had proved that the greatest relationships are partnerships of equals, that real love empowers rather than obligates, that trust is earned through consistent action rather than demanded as a right. Their descendants carried those lessons forward, building their own lives on the principles Lucas and Nora had modeled. They learned to choose partners who respected them, to build relationships on honesty rather than secrets, to value trust and partnership above all else. They learned that debts of money could be repaid, but debts of the heart were not really debts at all, just gifts freely given and received. The little dress shop in Wallace, Idaho was long gone by the time the 21st century arrived, replaced by modern buildings that bore no trace of the woman who had once stood behind its counter, reading a letter that spelled disaster. The ranch had changed hands multiple times, the Jennings family eventually selling it to pursue other opportunities. But the story remained, passed down through journals and letters and oral tradition, a testament to a love that had transformed not just 2 lives, but generations of lives that followed. In the end, that was Lucas and Nora's true legacy. Not the money or the property or the businesses they had built, though those had value. Their real gift was showing that love, real love, is never about obligation or debt. It is about choice, about seeing someone at their lowest and choosing to help them rise, about building a partnership based on respect and trust, about giving freely without expectation of return. Lucas had walked into Nora's shop on a spring day in 1884 and paid off her late husband's debts without asking for anything in return. In doing so, he had given her the chance to rebuild her life, to find her strength, to discover that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. And she, in turn, had given him a family, a purpose, a love that made his life worth living. They had built something beautiful from ashes and fear and desperation. They had proved that happy endings were possible even after tragedy, that new beginnings could be better than what came before, that love could heal even the deepest wounds if given a chance. Their story was over, but its echoes continued, rippling forward through time in the lives of their descendants, in the fund that still helped women in need, in the memories preserved in journals and letters and family stories. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, with all its hardship and challenge and opportunity. But more than that, it was a story of the human heart, of our capacity for kindness and love and hope, and it all started with a debt that was paid and a love that asked for nothing but gave everything that mattered, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, and that real love is measured not in what is owed, but in what is freely chosen, day after day, year after year, for a lifetime and beyond.